This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
Can't wait. Do you have the tweets? Am I going to describe them live without seeing them?
I thought you were bringing tweets today.
I thought you were bringing tweets. I mean,
so I gotta dig up
just...
Jeremy Schrader's tweet. Well, first I should say that this is the Wedge Live podcast. We're recording now, so this is the Wedge Live podcast with co-host PeggySue, and in about 15 minutes we're going to be interviewing Ward 1 City Council candidate Elliott Payne. But for the first 15 minutes, it's just going to be me and PeggySue looking for tweets because she's planning to do a segment where she narrates tweets, bad tweets, weird tweets.
Live interpretation. We love to turn in podcasts describing things that are just photos, and so I don't know. I think this could work just because I'm really excited to make fun of people. That sounds meaner than I intend it to be, but I think it'll be good.
And PeggySue didn't expect that we'd be doing this opening segment, so.
I didn't know it was happening, but I like it. I'm into it. I was eating a cookie, right, and that's now delayed, which is fine.
You can keep eating the cookie.
It's all right. I don't want to be rude. I will continue drinking my cocktail, but I'll wait on the cookie.
Mostly what I'd planned to do was to bring up the fact that you are a former Miss Northeast Minneapolis. Right.
That's true.
And
makes me uniquely qualified for our interview today.
And on the YouTube version of the show, I will flash a photo of that and then play this music.
There she is, Miss
Northeast Minneapolis.
I was when you sent it to me, I was like, oh God, that's going to be so embarrassing. I'm really nervous about what this is going to be. And then I laughed so hard for so long at that. Just feels like it's just so good. I watch a lot of TikTok, and so it feels like a TikTok joke to me.
Okay.
There's a lot of...
Are you on TikTok?
Yeah, I'm extremely on TikTok. It's probably a little embarrassing.
Creating content, though?
Not really creating content. I thought about it. I started it. It's just, you really have to be dedicated to TikTok, and I'm just not. But
and you could take that.
I don't want to.
Take that music.
I don't want to strive to. Yeah, I love watching TikTok, and it's also just super addicting. You just scroll forever. But I'm just not online enough to I just don't have enough free time. I think the people who are amazing at TikTok it's their jobs, right? So
yeah.
But yes, I was Miss Northeast Minneapolis. It was not a beauty pageant, John. I've been waiting 12 hours to tell you it was not a beauty pageant.
Okay, it's not a beauty pageant. What is it then?
So it's a scholarship program.
Isn't that what Miss America is? A scholarship program?
Yes. Miss America is actually a scholarship program, but it's actually a beauty pageant. The Aquatennial Queen of the Lakes is also a scholarship program. And to run for the Aquatennial Queen of the Lakes, many communities throughout the state have ambassador programs. So it's an amazing, opportunity. Really, if you have kids, it's such a good way for them to learn skills of talking in front of people and getting out into the community and orienting them through service. And some communities only have big kids. So big kids, which are 16, 17, 18. And then some communities have little kids and big kids. So my program had little kids and big kids. So we had, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds and then big kids. And it's really fun. I mean, obviously you do like go to parades, but then you also represent your community. And I got to meet so many people and do so many service projects. You know, you flip pancakes with Kiwanis, and you go to Rotary lunches, and you do service projects with Lions. And you know, we did a huge sock drive, and the Northeast program does like a big, like kind of like 50s themed party that raises socks and other warm clothes for St. Mary's. Um, so it's really, really service focused. And at the end, you do get a scholarship for college. And it was really fun. I don't know, I speak really highly of it. I think a lot of girls, women who have done it, really developed a lot of really fun life skills, and you get a really deep love for the community. You know, most people aren't doing it in Minneapolis, right?
There's no Miss Uptown. There's no Miss Wedge.
No, there's no Miss Wedge. There used to be a lot of these. So there used to be a Miss North Minneapolis. And I think there also used to be like a Miss South or Southeast Minneapolis. So all the different parts had programs, right? And the city used to fund them. Most communities, the city funds it, right? So the Public Works Division works on your float. You know, you have a really strong relationship probably with your mayor council. And it's even a little bit more civic oriented. And Minneapolis just like doesn't pay for that for any program. So especially like the ones, I think Northeast and North were like kind of the longest running ones, and Northeast still exists. I think partially because the business community really loves the Celebrate Northeast Parade. So I don't know if you've ever attended that. I mean, there's a huge corridor and like down central that is just full of businesses, is so vibrant. And so that parade in June is really heavily celebrated still, which is also unique that most neighborhoods don't have. There's no wedge parade, right? And so yeah, it's a really fun, and you get this like deep connection. And now as like a civil servant, like I love that. I wish I worked in a community. My community doesn't have an ambassador program either, but there are communities like Anoka and Richfield, Hopkins, that have these really long-standing, super long history scholarship programs. That, you know, Hopkins is a cool one where they've had it for like 100 years. Their float's amazing. They pass their crowns down, and they've been passing crowns down for like generations. So it's a cool thing that communities do. And I like, it's not like put a swimsuit on and walk across the stage and like tell everyone you want world peace. It's definitely more about, you know, service and getting to know your community.
And your deep connection to Northeast Minneapolis is one of the reasons you are co-hosting this episode of the podcast.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It probably means I have to admit that I did grow up in Columbia Heights and St. Anthony.
Okay.
So it does make you eligible. That is how I was Miss Northeast, is because I lived in St. Anthony.
Oh, no.
And the St. Anthony Lions are a really big supporter of the Celebrate Northeast celebration. But this is also like 11 years ago. But, you know, I grew up in Columbia Heights, which is basically like Northeast, bigger. Like parts of Columbia Heights are less north than parts of South Minneapolis are south.
Well, so that's revelation. Not as authentic as I hoped.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's not quite as authentic as you were hoping for, but I think you were going to ask me to co-host with you anyways, regardless.
I mean, I was, and then you sent me the picture. This is perfect.
So yeah, but I'm excited. If we could have afforded it, we would have bought in Northeast, right? Mm-hmm. We bought a house recently, and I like had like a full scale meltdown thinking about like not shopping at the Quarry Target. I don't know why. That's just like where I shopped my like literal entire life. And I was like, if we move to South Minneapolis, what Target will I shop
The
at?
Uptown Target, of course.
Couldn't be me.
So did you find the chicken laundry tweet?
I did find that.
Okay.
I found the chicken laundry tweet. So I'm not going to spoil it for folks, but just
chicken laundry is all you have to say.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
I guess that's probably the only one we'll do. We can do that after.
It's all right.
Elliott.
It can be a nice warm up for the segment. We'll see how the listeners respond.
Yeah. You're implying that you're coming back for sure. This is a
Well, if they
tryout.
like me describing a Jeremy Schroeder tweet, then 100% coming back.
Yes, it's Schrader. It's Schrader.
Couldn't care. Sorry. I just couldn't. I'm sorry.
That's the attitude you're bringing to the mean comments about tweets segment.
Listen, John and I have developed a relationship because I like to host trivia. If you're a Patreon subscriber, I host trivia on this for people who are on the Slack. Yeah, and it's fun. We mostly we've had 2 trivia times so far, and both of them have, just with an election this season, have been mostly focused on politics, and the last one was on DFL candidates. And I can tell you now that even as a person with a really difficult to pronounce last name, that does not exempt me from being bad at pronouncing other people's last names. And
how do we pronounce your last name?
Mihi.
Oh, that's how I would pronounce it if I had tried to pronounce it without. Yeah. I feel like I've heard it pronounced before, but like for some other person, but I don't know who or where that would have been. Is there a famous person with that last name?
No, I'm Moroccan, and we only pass our last names down through your lineage, so it's just me.
It's just you.
Just me? Well, I mean, just me and like my brothers and my cousins.
I feel like I need to fix my light. Maybe I need to turn the light on in the kitchen because I've got shadows on my face. So it's all you for this next 30 seconds.
Well, I will, in practice and preparation, I will just describe, if you are listening to this podcast and you don't watch the YouTube, behind John, very blank wall, very white, but he has 2 nice photos. One, what I believe to be the Uptown Arby's roast beef sign.
That's right. You've been narrating my photos.
Incredible. Truly an icon, a relic. We should have made them save it. Put it in the museum of the Kmart sign and this sign. And then the other one, again, if you're not watching the YouTube of this and you're just purely podcasting, is a delightful kitten with a ribbon. It's kind of all of the photo, the Grace photo with the man praying over bread. It looks very similar to that. But just a cat enjoying what I think are some baguettes. It's great.
That's like a basket full of thread.
Yeah.
These are scissors, and that's like a spool of thread. And I think the cat is sewing. That's a basket with, sewing stuff in it.
Wow.
That's what that is.
Incredible cat. Those are skills that my 2 cats do not possess.
If you get a good look at the cat's face, it's very human. So it's like it was painted by an artist who couldn't quite paint cats. I'll cut the music. Okay, do we need to prepare for Elliott? Because he could drop in at any moment.
It does look like he's coming. I see a little guest at the bottom.
Okay, let's get serious.
I'll adjust my tie.
Candidate is on the way. It almost has a live feel, even though it's recorded.
It does feel it's the same pressure, right? Since we're not going to edit anything.
We're not editing any of the embarrassing parts out.
John, is this fine?
The cat, yeah. Cats are fine. Hey, Elliott. So we are joined by Elliott Payne, who is a city council candidate in Ward 1, running against incumbent Kevin Reich. So do you know what Wedge Live is? Or did you just feel obligated to come on any weirdo show with a podcast?
I've been a casual fan of Wedge Live on Twitter for some time now.
Okay, you're not just saying that.
No, not at all. I work in City Hall. Of course you come up frequently.
Okay, yeah. So I just learned that about you. You worked in the Office of Performance and Innovation, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so can you talk about the work you did there and kind of what came out of that work?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be. Am I your third guest?
Fourth. You are the 4th guest.
All right.
On the website. First city council candidate, though. So.
All right. Well,
you have that distinction.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I've been working on the Office of Performance and Innovation for a little over 4 years, and we have, been at City Hall since around the time of Betsy Hodges' era. And a lot of the focus from the previous administration was around racial equity. So racial equity has guided a lot of our portfolio of projects, and that is anything from work around evictions when it comes to renters, all the way through to supporting women and minority-owned business owners through entrepreneurship initiatives at the city. And then most recently, just at the end of the year, last year, we got some budget recommendations passed around alternative responses to policing. So you've probably read about that one, because that one was a little bit intense and continues to be intense.
And I read where you talked about how, talking about the incumbent and how not every policy that you develop in that office ever even comes up for a vote. So the work you did there kind of needs a champion on the council to make it happen.
That's right. Yeah. So
talk about what's an example of a policy that needed a champion that didn't have one?
One that really comes to mind for me was work we were doing in conjunction with the Civil Rights Department and procurement. And this was specifically around a program to support the goal of the program is to grow contracting opportunities for women and minority-owned businesses. And so our team engaged with civil rights, procurement, and public works, because a lot of the major contracting opportunities within the city are through public works. And we were looking at ways of streamlining the process by which we set goals for spending for women and minority-owned businesses. And so I prototyped out a solution that would essentially streamline this very manual process where contract managers have to manually assign a certain spending target for various subcontracting opportunities. And they're doing it all through spreadsheets and, kind of some very kind of boutique built workflows. And so I kind of created a custom workflow for that using software, but it was only at the level of a prototype. And for anybody who might be listening who's not familiar with prototyping, it's essentially like a rough mock-up of what a real system might look like, so that you can do it relatively quickly and relatively cheaply, so you can explore ideas, so that you can really vet those ideas out. And it was really funny because you can play with the different levels of how real or fake it looks. And in this instance, I made it look like it was real software where you could click on it and it would look like it worked. And you build prototypes so you can test them with people, because you want to get rid of bad ideas early in a process so you don't waste time or money on bad ideas. But you also do it so that you can validate good ideas. And in the instance where I was demoing this prototype, one of the contract managers was like, "Oh my God, when can we start using that?" But it would actually require quite a bit of investment to build it out custom. And they were already several months deep into a procurement process to explore vendors to build out that kind of solution. So our team was working as basically a management consulting group, but within City Hall. And so they had already been working with the procurement department to go source vendors to build out this solution prior to us getting involved in the process. And so what ended up happening is, as they were going through that vendor vetting process, that it just lost steam, right? And that's kind of a very common thing. And this isn't unique to City Hall by any means. I do a lot of this kind of innovation consulting in corporations. Very often people will invest in some new interesting technology. So I've worked on things like chatbots before in my past. I've worked on mobile apps, things like that. And people, especially when it comes to kind of relatively trendy ideas, people will pursue them with great interest because there's so much enthusiasm behind them. And then once you start running into the actual level of work necessary to implement, that's where people maybe start kind of second guessing. And that's a really common thing, and that's not unique to City Hall. But right now, the city is facing challenges where we really need to follow through on some ideas, especially if any of those ideas are related to racial equity. There are so many disparities in the city right now. Many of those disparities are being newly revealed to a lot of people within the city, because if you are a person of a certain background, Minneapolis has been a really wonderful city for you, and you are really well served by the way that it's run. But that doesn't include everyone. And I think that more people see that more clearly today than they ever have in the past. And I think that we need to have really rigorous pursuits of doing things differently, and we need to have that coming from our highest leaders. And I think that's one of the really great opportunities behind my campaign.
Yeah, and something I have observed about Kevin Reich is that he's kind of quiet, especially after 2017. I think, so I have it written down here, like 180 some votes separating Julia and Kevin Reich in 2017.
Yeah.
I think as a result of that, he has kind of stayed quiet. He hasn't cast a lot of standout bad votes, but he also has not been a vocal champion for change, because I really can't tell you what he's a champion for. He's on the Transportation and Public Works Committee, and I know you pointed out that he's been a part of supporting some of these policies quietly, transportation wise. But what has that meant on the ground in Ward 1 as far as delivering safer streets for pedestrians and bicyclists and better transit connections? So can you talk about what you would do in Ward 1 to put some of the city's transportation policies to prioritize bicyclists and pedestrians and transit users? How would you implement that?
Yeah, transportation is such an important issue, right? There are so many people that rely on public transit to get to work. It opens up so many opportunities. And a lot of our actual transportation infrastructure, it's not geared at the people who need it the most sometimes, right? So we look at things like the Midtown Greenway, which doesn't go through Ward 1, right? But if you live in Ward 1 and you're trying to get to another part of the city, there's not always really strong bike infrastructure to get you there, right? There's not always a really strong bus network to get you somewhere. People will lose 4 weeks a year in transit time compared to drivers, right? If you take public transit versus driving, some people can lose up to 4 weeks a year. And that's time people could be spending with their family. That's time people could be spending investing in their community. We need really strong east-west connections. We need to have ways of students getting to school. And when we have robust transportation infrastructure, it can really be this really a strong force for good in terms of addressing inequities and creating opportunities for everyone. And one of the things that, you know, will frequently happen is we have all these different layers of jurisdictions, right? So right now there's a really big project proposal happening on Lowry Avenue, which is a county road, right? And I think there's some temptingness to look to those other jurisdictions and say, hey, I have to know what my scope is as a council member, and that's for city, and that's a county thing, right? But I think there's a really great opportunity to not just be an advocate for transportation quietly for your ward. It's you're representing everyone in the ward. And that means you may have to have conversations with your colleagues at the county level. You may have to have conversations with your colleagues at the state level. And we need to go out of our way to advocate for policies, even when they go beyond just the scope of what's covered in Ward 1.
Yeah, I also just want to chime in. Like, I think that's such a good stance, right? Of like, we want council members. My favorite saying is like, run for the office you're running for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not to say like you're running on a platform of like fix Lowry Avenue, but like how council members can across agencies. Like, how do you imagine going about that? Like, not being someone who's like playing any sort of political games right now or
Mm-hmm.
in that world. Like, how do you want to start to build those relationships?
Actually, just you even talking about relationships is key. And just in the short period of time I guess 4 years is kind of a long period of time in City Hall. So much comes down to relationships, right? So before you're even assigned to a committee or get a chairship of a certain committee, you need to have relationships. You need to be engaged across all the various stakeholders, both inside City Hall and outside of City Hall. There are people that are strong advocates for so many issues, whether it's transportation, housing, safety, right? There's people that have been doing this work for years, long before I was considering running, right? And one of the things that's, I think, really incumbent on me as a candidate, let alone a city council member, is to basically grow those relationships, feed those relationships, nurture those relationships, because you can't get anything done without knowing who to talk to. And I think that's one of the roles of a council member, is being able to hold those relationships and be able to make those connections, let alone getting the vote for the right issues, right? So the vote is only one part of the way power is expressed as a council member. I think another way that it's important is to show up and have invitations into this process too. I think it takes a lot of people to get the kind of transformational work done that I'd like to see done in our city. And I think it would be hubristic to think that it comes down to one individual. And so I think the way that we get this kind of work done is through having these strong relationships across multiple stakeholder groups.
I love that. I think that's such a good thing to be already thinking about, is just how you reach not only across like the council chambers to other members who don't align, but also to other agencies. I just want to zoom out a little bit and just think about like Northeast is really dynamic. Like you're representing a lot of different things. You're representing places that are really, really dense and places that are more single family home neighborhoods. And I think even on your website, you kind of say like it's one of those places that Northeast welcomes new neighbors. And I think, I grew up in Northeast, and I think there's kind of these rumblings of like the older Northeasters, the Northeasters, if you will, who kind of are grumbling about the like uptownification of Northeast, and what does it look like that Northeast is getting denser. And I'd be curious to know, like, why does that matter to kind of call that out, like on your website as like one of the big headers? Is that that's something that you represent is finding space for everyone?
Yeah, I think a key word in there is dynamism, right? And I think what makes Northeast truly special is the fact that we have an arts community, we have industry, we have working families, we have pretty wealthy folks here too. We have so many different cross sections of our society represented right here in our ward, right? And I think that old Northeast and new Northeast is way too one-dimensional to even describe what's happening here, right? And it's really funny because I'm at this like threshold. I've been living in Northeast for over 15 years. Am I a newcomer or am I an old comer, right? And it's also, we need to name certain aspects of this too that are just around the fear of change, the fear of newness, right? And I think that we've seen the kind of transformation in Northeast, and it's not just Northeast, it's Northeast and it's Southeast and it's mid-city industrial, right? It's all of those different parts of the ward coming together and making it the really special part of Minneapolis that it is, right? And I think that we need to lean into that diversity, and that's going to make us a much stronger and more vibrant community, right? And I think if we just lean on this old and new Northeast thing, we're losing a lot of opportunity to slightly one-dimensional thinking. And I think that one of the big cases for me wanting to run is everything about the world has changed, right? Like new Northeast, old Northeast, it's like it's pre-COVID, post-COVID, right? And anything that's pre-COVID is almost like hard to even imagine what the world was like, right? So it's kind of like we have a whole new story. There's a whole new chapter, maybe even a whole new book in this series that we're the story that we're telling about the word. And I think that's a really key part of this conversation.
I love that. And okay, so now you can settle this debate. You've lived in Northeast for 15 years. someone explain to me, when did we start calling it the East Side? I'm like fundamentally opposed to this as a name. Like I was making fun of another candidate's website for calling it the East Side, and then I had to make fun of your website for calling it the East Side. Someone explain this to me.
Because we appreciate all of our constituents, including those in Southeast.
Oh,
Okay.
all right.
It's about being inclusive.
It is.
PeggySue.
I hate it personally.
If you weren't from Columbia Heights, you would know this.
I'm very like Northeast, like with the D, like
Mm-hmm.
so. I'm like, the East Side. What are we talking about? No part of Northeast is East. Anyways, like if you're not familiar with Northeast Minneapolis, it's not East anyways. So
I think there's room for a candidate to step in and be like a Northeast chauvinist and be like, forget the rest of it. This is not the East Side. Maybe that's you. Maybe that's you, PeggySue.
Maybe it is. I don't think so. But you know what? I have an answer. I feel good about. I feel medium about the answer. I'm not gonna say I feel good about it, but I can understand it.
Are we ready to transition to charter amendments?
Absolutely.
Okay. This will probably be easy questions.
Mm-hmm.
Do you support the public safety charter amendment?
I do.
Okay, and both the citizen-led version and the council-led version.
I do, because I think having the kind of community support behind the citizen-led one is really powerful, right? It has this resonance around the momentum of change that so many people want to see. And I think that the council-led one is also appropriate because we have to change, right? We cannot go back to the way things were. We cannot keep on doing things the same way that we've always been doing them. And the language of these amendments, it's setting the language aside even, just the concept is so straightforward. Safety is about more than policing, right? And it's like, we could really simplify this by asking a simple question. Do you want a police officer responding when your house is on fire?
No.
No, we don't, right? You want a fire truck to show up that has, the capability of connecting up to a fire hydrant and having crew that are specifically trained in some of the ways of putting fires out and some of the hazards that they should avoid, and having a very targeted response to that type of harm that's happening within the community. The idea of this is no different than that, right? There are so many different ways that harm can show up in a community. And, even your most ardent police supporter would recognize that police are being tasked with responding with way too many issues in the community, with way too little resources and way too little training for those issues, and way too little expertise in those issues. And so what the Charter Amendment does is it acknowledges that truth, and it's proactive about saying we need to have targeted responses for the types of harms that can show up in the community.
I think it's really appropriate to bring up the fire department in this context, because another aspect of the charter amendment that doesn't get a lot of focus is basically the authority structure there, and who has the power to set policy for police in Minneapolis. Because I don't know if a lot of voters know this. Maybe you have some context on how many people you're in touch with who know this about police in Minneapolis. The council has no authority to tell the police what they can or can't do, what weapons they can use. Can they use less lethal projectiles or gas in a crowd control situation? That's the mayor.
That's right.
So, like, the fire department operates in a way that every other department in Minneapolis operates on, and they still put out fires. Mm-hmm. They go to emergencies, and there's this red herring out there about, what are you going to do in an emergency if we don't have the single boss in charge to handle it?
Right.
So can you talk about the importance of, just being able to follow through on the commitments you make on public safety, mm-hmm. without passing the charter amendment? Should you just delete your public safety section off your website if we can't actually give you the power to do any of it?
No, absolutely not. I mean, even within the current structure of the charter, my team directly worked on shaping how the police respond or who responds in certain circumstances. And so we made recommendations to have mental health professionals respond to mental health calls, right? That capability exists within the existing charter, right? And that's getting implemented this year. One of the reasons I'm running is because I'm impatient with the pace of change. And I want to see, this should only be a start, right? Hiring 2 mental health professionals and 2 EMTs to create 2 teams to have, enough coverage for the peak call times as a pilot is a start. It's not an end, right? We're not finished with this work by just implementing the recommendations that we got passed last year within the existing charter. But that's instructive about what is possible within the existing charter. But one of the big problems right now with the way that the accountability structure exists is it's a black box. And within that black box is a lot of discretion. So I can't tell you what the use of force policies are by the police. I don't know what gets to be considered acceptable violence versus unacceptable violence. I don't know what that threshold is in terms of it being codified in some sort of written document, because they don't have to tell us in the public. And as such, they don't need to tell council members when they ask. And so part of this is just getting the accountability structures in place so that we can have more clarity around how the police are approaching their work, right? Let alone having the room to have alternative responses that can be more solidly funded and held accountable and measured across their outcomes. And so one of the other capabilities within the team that I work on in City Hall is performance reporting. So using data to determine how well we're spending budget. And that's not a police issue, that's across every single charter department. And so that performance management capability can be strengthened and used as a way of saying, are we getting our potholes filled in for the money that we're spending, right? Not just, are we keeping people safe? This should be kind of an outcomes-based way of managing the entire enterprise. And keeping us safe is one of any number of larger goals that the city has. But one of the things that's a problem is we can't do that kind of reporting when we don't have the visibility.
So when people talk about reallocating some public safety funds away from police towards these other services, public safety related resources, people conflate defund, dismantle, abolish. A lot of people don't know what any of that really means when an elected official or a candidate says it.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've used dismantle on your website. So what does it mean to dismantle MPD?
This is about the current system, right? So like as an example, like the chief of police, he is representing, when he was brought on as the chief, he represented so much change, right? Just his identity, his background. I mean, he literally sued the police department as a uniform officer against discrimination practices, right? On paper, you couldn't find a stronger advocate for reform, but under the current system, he has not been able to deliver that reform, right? The mayor and Mayor Fry's almost his entire reason, like his case for why he should be mayor when he ran was change, right? Particularly in response to Jamar Clark. And so, Betsy Hodges is now out. Chief Harto is now out. We have these new champions for change in, but we didn't actually change anything structurally. And we got the same outcome, right? So what dismantling means is about saying we need to look at the structural way that the police department is managed and change it. And it's as simple as that, right? Because we're not going to get a changing outcome by doing the exact same set of inputs.
So what do you say to somebody who sees that and like, well, you're going to make the police go away? And what do we do with that?
I think you acknowledge the honest fear that's a true fear, right? And one of the things that's really challenging is that like people call the police for everything because they don't know who else to call because we haven't created someone else to call. There is no other response. You call 911 and you expect the police to show up, whether that's a mental health circumstance, a domestic violence circumstance, or like an active crime happening. And so, one of the things, and this is actually part of the abolition conversation, is we need to have a clear vision of what it means to have a responsive city. And there's a roadmap towards that type of outcome where I think this is where it is really the role of somebody in leadership to create that vision and that roadmap. And we have to create these basically mile markers of when we've achieved the next level of response, right? So we can't take police off the street and just say, hey, good luck, everyone. No, we have to create this roadmap. One of these mile markers is the recommendations that passed last year and having these mental health professionals ready to respond, right? And what's the protocol for when we call the mental health professional in? How do we make the triage, call center decision about, well, it sounded like a weapon might be involved, therefore it should be this response versus this emotionally disturbed person had some suicidal, fears. We had some concerns about their well-being. We should send this response, right? We have to demonstrate that in action as a major milestone, and then we can move on to the next targeted intervention, and then the next targeted intervention, and then soon enough, people are going to be very comfortable with different responses. But it's hard to imagine those alternative responses in the absence of a demonstration of those. And so one of the really important things about the Charter Amendment is it creates space to come up with those alternatives, whether it's as a pilot or as a fully rolled out new way of responding. And when people see the performance of those, because we do need to track the performance of how well they're performing, then people will be more at ease and more comfortable. And right now, if you call 911 because you hear somebody cutting a catalytic converter off of your car or some noise that sounds like that, it's not likely that a police officer is going to get there to prevent your catalytic converter from getting stolen. They just don't have that kind of response time. I listened to a crime prevention specialist, share that it takes like 2 minutes to cut off a catalytic converter. There's just not going to be a response to that. And this is one of those things where it's like, well, maybe the way of preventing people from stealing catalytic converters is having people have, safe and stable housing or,
Right.
Appropriate responses to addiction.
Yeah. A lot of the crime stuff is kind of pandemic and economic, misery related. Let's move on to the Strong Mayor Charter Amendment. How do you feel about that one? Are you running for office and supporting a charter amendment that would make you weaker if you won?
I fall back on the principle that I want to represent all of Ward 1, right? And in my role as a city council member, I should be the most accessible version of government to the people who live in the ward, right? I should be responsive via email. I should be responsive via social media. We should have formal and informal ways of getting in touch with me and to respond to the needs of the community. And I think there's something powerful in the way that city council can be that accessible, at least in concept. Not all council members are that accessible, but I think that there is a governance challenge to the weak mayor system, 100%. But I don't think that a strong mayor amendment fixes the governance problem. I think good governance fixes the governance problem, right? And I would not like to see a strong mayor system that has even less accessibility by constituents and a mayor that still only answers to a narrower set of constituencies.
So what do you think the governance problem is with the current system? Like, if you're the charter commission, what is your charter amendment to fix what you see as the problem with Minneapolis's government structure?
I don't know that that's a charter conversation. I honestly think it's a leadership conversation, right? And I think that one of the reasons that I'm running is that the pandemic has just really transformed like all aspects of humanity, right? Like never before has humanity changed their everyday behavior on a global level at this scale, probably ever in the history of humanity, right? And I think that up until the pandemic, we were still operating in a post World War II industrial structure of our society and economy. And that post World War II industrial way of governance has really led to some of the disparities that we see today, right? And I think addressing those disparities requires a modern approach to governance. And we have tools like, I'll just say the internet broadly. I'm kind of like a child of the internet, right? And it's like, even you on Wedge Live, you have a larger platform than many elected officials. You may have an impact on policy at a greater scale than one city council member, just because the level of voice that you have as an individual, right? That's never ever been seen in history before, to have that kind of power, right?
It's really depressing. It's depressing, isn't it?
It is. Mark Zuckerberg is the most powerful human on earth, more powerful than the president of the United States in many ways, right? And so I don't think a charter amendment changes that dynamic, but I think a recognition of how power is diffused across the city is a very good starting point, right? And how a person sitting in an elected council seat can channel the power of the community is another piece of that puzzle, right? And again, I think that goes outside of the scope of the charter amendment. I don't think some specific language within the charter amendment really tackles the challenge of that. And so I think part of tackling the challenge of that is first acknowledging this power dynamic shift within this kind of new information age.
Okay. Let's hit a couple of quick ones. Parking, there's currently a proposal to eliminate parking minimum citywide. It's something that's in the 2040 plan, and also another to legalize single room occupancy in Minneapolis, making its way. Do you support those?
Yeah, because you have to see what the actual, it's like a cause and effect relationship, and it's one of those unintended consequence things, right? It sounds good in concept to have parking minimums, but the effect of that has led to much more expensive building development. It's led to much more restrictive development opportunities because of zoning. And one of the biggest challenges that I think the city is facing today is a housing crisis. And one of the ways of addressing that crisis is going to be, we need more units. It's a supply and demand thing, right? And any policy that is basically creating a barrier to some of those developments should be looked at, right? And again, everything is intertwined. We were talking about transportation earlier. If we have a more robust public transit system, the desire for parking becomes less and less, right? So again, that's that post-World War II industrial economy that those regulations are planning for, where cars were the central focus of a lot of urban planning. And I think that we're just in a new reality today.
Great. PeggySue?
Yeah, I like that. I like the kind of the idea of kind of how do we remove some of those restrictions to make things easier, especially in the business climate and especially in regard to housing. And I think, you know, Northeast has kind of been this hot spot almost of NIMBYism, especially in the last few months. I think about some of, it seems like a lot of that comes from the art community. And in my mind, the art community is kind of almost like that first wave of gentrification that even came to Northeast Minneapolis, right? Where we see a lot of artists who really desire to live in that community. And now they're the ones that are kind of fighting against housing. You know, like they came and they drove up the prices and they drove up the demand for the neighborhood, which is amazing and has brought a lot of really good things. But now they're the ones saying like, no, you can't build next to my art studio, or no, we want to block some of this housing. So I'm wondering if you can just kind of talk a little bit about how those things are interrelated, and what your stance is on affordability. I think I have a sense of what you're going to say, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it maybe would be a little bit unfair to say that the arts community is against development. I know that there can be specific instances where that may appear to be the case, but I think part of that is this gets back to governance and whose voice is heard in some of these processes, right? And so I think I know the specific project that you're referencing when you're talking about that, but part of what I've witnessed just in doing kind of some of my due diligence around some of these policies is kind of like the timing of when you're engaging community when it relates to certain development projects. And then just kind of some of the opaqueness of how these development projects come to life. And I think part of what we see when we see NIMBYism is community maybe feeling like they don't have ownership over some of these, these new plans that are coming forward, or that those plans are maybe created outside of the context of that community and they feel bolted on into the community. So I think I'd like to maybe like separate two different issues, right? So like one issue is how do you engage with community in a way where they feel like their voice is included and that their concerns are like sincerely being heard? I think that's one issue to set aside, right? And then the other issue is we need more housing. How do we do that? Right? Which is a much different conversation. And a lot of that is, there's a lot of opportunity there, right? Whether that's from a policy perspective, all the way through to a funding perspective, all the way through to a zoning perspective. And I think that what we need to do is we need to ground all of those complexities in some really clear principles. And so like for me, one of my number one principles is equity and disparities. Are we pursuing this in a way that will close some of the existing historical disparities? And, who stands to benefit when we pursue some of these plans, right? And so I think when you can start grounding some of these really complex issues, and I went really deep on housing policy in particular, because it turns out it's really complex and it's all of these, things around federal funding sources and the requirements associated with that, zoning and variances, and there's a lot of complexity, but I had to kind of pause and go, what's the role of government? And for me, one of the roles of government is to create a channel for a person with less power and money to have more voice and impact, right? And when we start from there, then we can start actually looking at these challenges and kind of like work through these complexities with all the stakeholders at the table. And I think one of my most important roles that I can play is to amplify the voice of people who don't have power. And I think if we approach it that way, we can land at a place where artists are completely supportive of a new development project, right? Because I think one of the things that's happened with artists is that, like, oftentimes, or at least historically, they've been called, fluffy, unimportant parts of our society. These like culture creators have been like completely sidelined and marginalized themselves, just from a economic security perspective, right? And so I think they're feeling marginalized when a government comes in and just says, this is the plan. What do you think? We think this is good. What do you think? Right? Versus being at the table during that planning process and kind of being able to get behind a set of goals. We want more affordability in our neighborhood. We want to welcome new neighbors in our neighborhood. We want to have diverse, not just people, but diverse industry in our neighborhood, right? When we can agree on those ultimate goals, then we can actually start doing the hard work of navigating the complexities of funding sources, zoning variances and all of those other things that are typically very strife with conflict, right? But the first thing we have to do is get to a set of shared principles and values. And then we can actually lean into that conflict in a really constructive way.
PeggySue, are you done with the substantive questions? Because I have a personal question.
I think I can be done with the substantive questions. I just have one last really important question, which is, what is, in your opinion, the best restaurant in Northeast, and why is it Chimborazo?
Oh my God, it was so Chimborazo.
Yes. Oh.
It was
I have no idea what Chimborazo is. I don't know what that is.
Oh my God.
I'm from the Wedge.
You gotta get on my level. You gotta get on our level.
This is how you know
best.
that I am from Northeast, is that I knew the answer to this is Chimborazo. Chimborazo is Ecuadorian food.
It's Ecuadorian, and I was very fearful because Marco went back to Ecuador for a family reason and shut the restaurant down for like 3 months or something like that, and my heart broke. And this is how good it is not only did he come back and open it, but he opened it and expanded it, and it's better than ever. So yeah, Chimborazo is the absolute best.
Every day of this pandemic, I've been like, we should order from Chimborazo. We should make sure it survives. It's unreal. John, you got to do it. You can take the 10 right there.
Okay, I'll get on the bus. One of the problems is in Kevin Reich's Ward 1, once I get across the river on a bus, I can never find my way home. Although, like, that's a metro. I'm going to irritate PeggySue because that's a metro transit problem. It's not a city council issue, but
that's okay. You're allowed to be cranky about it. It is. I mean, I was transit dependent my entire life, and again, like, lived in Columbia Heights, and so it's not an easy thing to be transit dependent in Northeast. It takes a really long time.
That's why I'm constantly in the Wedge. Okay, personal question. 2020 was a terrible year. This is not an easy time to run for office. You shouldn't want to be running for city council right now.
Yeah.
So why disrupt your life? Why put yourself in a position to have people showing up at your house, yelling about how bad you are, sending you mean tweets, calling you on the phone, calling you names? It's not a great time to be an elected official.
I hope no one calls you names.
Why are you doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about this a lot. And one of the things is both of my parents were really strong activists. I've even done a FOIA request on my mom. She does have an FBI dossier, because she was a Vietnam protester. My dad was a civil rights activist. And I saw the hardship that is brought on a family when you go that route. And I was like, I'm going to go to college. I'm just going to try to have a career, right? And that's what brought me to Minneapolis in the first place. Because of reciprocity, I was able to get in-state tuition coming from Milwaukee to go to school at the University of Minnesota. And I was actually just going to try to live my life and have a career. And the first thing that happened is Ferguson. And Ferguson is the catalyst moment for me. But really what it was is watching Eric Gardner. That shattered any concept that I could just live my life, just live my best life. And I really was just trying to live my best life, right? And you cannot watch that video of Eric Gardner getting murdered and not recognize how broken something is in our society, right? I couldn't turn away from that. I couldn't silence it. It just was eating at me. Then a year later, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer the day after my birthday, the month we were moving into the house where we were going to start our family, right? And it's just like, it's such a life-altering experience to have your heart broken in these ways. And it's extremely hard to just try to live a good life and ignore injustice, And I recognized that I couldn't opt out of this fight, right? I couldn't just turn away from it, focus on my career, focus on my family. Those just weren't options for me. And I I mean, I was literally working on the team that had to that was responding to all of this terribleness. I mean, it's just I can't pay attention to the trial right now. Like, there's a certain level of emotional health that I have to maintain for myself, and one of the ways that I cope with this trauma is I try to channel my grief into action. I feel much better running for office than I do reflecting on the grief and trauma of not just George Floyd, like everything, right? And one of the things that cancer taught me is that certain things you're not in control of. You just, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't eat better. You can't work out more. My wife was 35 when she was diagnosed, and she was as healthy a person as you could be. I mean, she wasn't like a CrossFit junkie healthy, but like not a smoker, not a heavy drinker, very active, very healthy eater, and it came anyway, right? Certain things you are just not in control of. But you can control how you respond to certain things. And I feel that when I lean into things like running for political office, I'm now taking a little bit more ownership and control of my response to trauma rather than just reflecting on the things that are out of my control that break my heart.
Okay. Is there anything you want to wrap up with that we didn't cover?
No, just you can go to elliottpayne.org and support our campaign through donation.
And how do you feel like the campaign is going? Are you going to win? Are you winning?
I've already won. This has been one of the most meaningful things I've ever done in my life. I mean, I actually, as somebody who doesn't have this like deep history in politics, I imagine having a list of phone numbers to call of strangers being one of the hardest things you can do. And it's been one of the most enriching things I've ever done in my life. I mean, just hearing the level of enthusiasm and excitement around the campaign. So many people are hurting right now. There's so much trauma in our community, and everybody's trying to do what they can do within their sphere. And I am bringing kind of like my sphere of working in City Hall forward and trying to level up the level of impact that I can have by running for office. And that's a really unique position and experience for me to kind of be positioned that way. But everybody wants to do what they can do within their world. And I'm just finding that to be this really meaningful and enriching experience to have the kind of conversations I'm having with the people that I'm reaching out to and talking to every single day.
And you got to come on the Wedge Live podcast.
And I got to be on the Wedge Live podcast. Like, what's up?
Yeah. PeggySue, do you have any final thoughts before we let him go? Okay. Okay. We're going to end it right here. Elliott Payne, City Council candidate in Ward 1.
I really appreciate you having me.
And I think we're going to finish what we had planned for the PeggySue episode. We're going to have to split these into 2 episodes, I think.
You can't stitch them together?
I can't. I mean, it's going into maybe an hour and a half if we keep going. We went like 45 minutes with Elliott.
This can be a bonus episode.
Yeah, it's a bonus episode. So you're going to narrate a tweet, at least one tweet.
I have 2. I'm very excited.
2 tweets. Okay.
So,
And I have music prepared for it. You may have heard it earlier.
I'm loving it. I'm ready. So our first tweet comes.
I'm gonna have to reload it. So for some reason, it's not working. So give me a couple of seconds. We will definitely edit this part out of the show.
Yeah, I mean, what are our editing capabilities? I hope we can take lots of snips from the last episode, cut it out, and snip it with this. There's a lot of nonsense
I mean,
in the last
we could.
episode that can be cut out.
Yeah, it's true. Although everything with Elliott was good.
Oh my god, he's incredible.
What'd you think?
He was really wonderful.
Talk about him over the classical music.
This is so soothing. So our first tweet comes from @Jeremy Schrader. This Ward 11 12 rep is seen on a spring day in his backyard. A clothing line hangs connected to a green garage, and at his feet a smattering of chickens. Not one, not two, but 5 chickens of varying shades of red, orange, and black peck about the yard as Councilmember Schrader hangs a sock on the line whimsically. T-shirts hang from the lines. One reads, Bruin Stew, Chicago Ave's finest. No, Chicago Ave's Art Fest. Wow, cannot read. And a nice gray t-shirt with MPLS on it. Council member looks absolutely in his element and tweeted, "Happy spring, everyone." Everybody. Just a great moment encapsulated in the Nokomis neighborhood. I assume this is what it looks like if you live in Nokomis. Just chickens everywhere and clothing lines astrew. A laundry basket.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
All right. This next tweet.
And what's cue the music. Let me know when you're ready to go.
I'm ready. This next tweet comes from @Chris_Parsons74. Capping another stellar day of door knocking with a project. Always a good time to be supporting local businesses. What could I be painting with, quote, heirloom tomato, unquote, hashtag Christopher Ward 10. A seemingly really tall man holds up a bucket of Valspar interior flat paint while wearing his own campaign t-shirt and matching sunglasses in a neon orange. What I am concerned most about this photo is that while he is painting something with a color called heirloom tomato, it has a sticky that is the same color as his campaign t-shirt logo and his neon orange glasses. So, dear Chris Parsons, I hope that you are not painting something in your home, your campaign colors. So, and that is PeggySue Reads the Tweets.
I can't believe you didn't read the one where he's wearing a picture of OJ on his t-shirt.
You know,
it's like OJ in the gloves.
It's something that if that's what he wants to do with his life, I'm not gonna support him, but I'm also not gonna make fun of him. I'm much more concerned if you're painting your interior of your house neon orange. Can't support that.
Yeah. Because I'm not optimistic about the Chris Parsons campaign.
Well, it's going to be a brutal reminder if he loses. Please don't put that in your house.
Okay. Does this mean we've come to the end of the special PeggySue episode?
I think we have.
Are you going to come back? Did you enjoy it?
I did. This was really fun. I think, a good balance of making fun of stuff and talking to a good city council candidate, He follows my rule. Public safety is the first thing on his website. And he seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders. So excited to see where this takes him.
And one thing we didn't get to, in addition to the tweets that we just did there, was that you had prepared a whole script for me. It's like I was a little bit offended. You were like excited, urgent. Like I've got this prepared, as if I'm not going to come into this prepared with questions, things to talk about with the city council candidate. You seemed a little panicked, concerned for me.
It's not concerned for you. It's concerned for me. I was not sure how much preparedness I was going to get. So it was helpful for me to chart this out. I didn't mean to offend you, John.
No, I'm not offended. I'm touched. Here's from the script. Intro host, John intro. Remind people what the podcast is. Prob good to remind them what this is and who you are, LMAO. You think so little of me.
Again, see, I don't think that's it. I just think I listened to the first 2 episodes. I don't want you to cornhole yourself into this being too niche. I think it's approachable. That interview with Elliott could change a voter's mind. So people should know where they're consuming content from.
And as Elliott said, I've got more power than any individual member of the city council. That's just obvious.
You are a political
so give your honest assessment as someone who listened to the first 2 episodes, not as a co-host, but as a listener. What did you think?
I thought they were fun. I really enjoyed them. I'm excited to hear the episode that comes in between this one and the one with Krista from the BET. And I think this is such a good platform for this, right? Especially as we move out of being cooped up in our houses, having those really easy things to listen to, like a podcast. I think people are going to want to hear about candidates this way, especially if you can have these really fun, informal conversations with them. So I really like them. My structure that I suggested to you by this Google Doc was more just like, these are the only things I'm thinking about as I listen to this, is like, if I pick this up and I had no idea what I was listening to, these are some of the things I'd want to know. So yeah, I think that's
you got to read the podcast
excited.
description. You got to read the description.
John, what if they don't read the description? Sometimes I just put a podcast on. I don't read the description.
You just press play.
Yeah, I'm like, that looks like a cool title image. Yeah.
Okay. And at the end, you're like, play theme song again.
I think that's a nice way to go out. Play the theme song again.
Closing remarks. Thank the people. Thank you, everyone, for listening. PeggySue writes, tell them to rate and review on Apple Podcasts and all the other podcasting platforms too, not just Apple. That's important for like findability, right?
Yeah. You want people to rate and review. All rate and reviews. The people like them.
Also, recommend the Patreon. PeggySue writes, recommend the Patreon and that they get the delightful Slack group. Well, that's something we don't talk about publicly about the Slack, but we'll talk about it on the podcast. You do get access. You get some perks. And thank the people again. 2 thanks. Okay. Have I covered your checklist? Is this a good podcast now?
I'm never being asked back. Thank you for having me here this singular one time.
No, we're going to have you back all the time.
I promise I'll never make you a Google Doc again.
No, please do. And I just worry about you putting all this work. Because this is not your job. People think PeggySue's full-time job is the Wedge Live podcast. That's not true. You have a real job.
Yeah, my real job is doing the trivia for Patreon subscribers.
Right. Hey, you're the events chair of the Wedge Live Patreon.
That's my full-time job.
You keep it fun. But keep an eye out for like terrible tweets to narrate, Facebook posts, Instagram posts. We will have you back on for that segment. And like, I think you asked some really good questions of Elliott. We can do some more candidate interviews as long as it's not too much work for you.
No, I loved it. This was really fun.
Okay. This is the part of the episode. Every Wedge Live episode, I talk about pressing the stop button. So I'm going to do that now.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this.
We're in the wedge neighborhood right now, 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 right now.